Well, my fundraising story starts in 2013, so which is about 7 years from now. Uh, so I have been from a corporate background before that, 8, 9 years into a different kind of marketing and sales experience, because I have my master's in marketing and IT. And then I plan to make this shift into social sector back in 2013 when I started my work with Save the Children, India. Post that, I've worked about for 4 years, in say 4.5 years in Save the Children, before I shifted to Plan International for a very short stint. And then I moved on to Greenpeace Southeast Asia. And this is the first time I moved out of India, and now I'm in Malaysia as the fundraising director. So I'm the regional fundraising director for Greenpeace Southeast Asia, which comprises of 4 countries, which is Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and Philippines. So I would say the impact is more operational than strategic for us. If you see, now more than ever, the COVID crisis has kind of proved beyond any doubt the importance of organizations to have a more diversified fundraising strategy rather than depending on one channel. And we have been working on a new 3-year plan since 2019. And in this plan, our fundraising strategy stresses heavily on diversification as one of the main goals that we wanted to achieve, to move away from the offline face-to-face kind of mode as a sole dependency. So in that respect, this COVID incident has not impacted so much of our strategy, but it does have an operational impact, resulting from the loss of expected number of donors, regular donors that we were supposed to get from the offline channels like face-to-face. Yes, and this impact may be less visible this year, I would say, because it's a small acquisition loss, but it will be maybe more visible in the next 2 years. But if you see the overall, it's not strategic. In fact, if something, this incident has reinforced our long-term strategy of having more balanced outlook to incomes, right? So we believe that with this plan, I think it has given us an opportunity also to test new channels and to introduce new channels, more sustainable alternate channels. And we expect that we'll come back out of this crisis stronger with more balanced engagement and fundraising plan. I would not say that it's too much of a difference. To start with, we do have a prioritization when we talk about the 4 countries in terms of which are our main leading countries in terms of regional fundraising for Greenpeace Southeast Asia, which is mostly Malaysia and Thailand for us. So while we saw that situations in the beginning, if you have seen Indonesia, it was more of like, oh, there is no cases in Indonesia. So there was no lockdown for longest time, right? Whereas Thailand was quick to react and quick to actually manage the problems. Malaysia came after that. But if you look at the regional scenario, right? What it meant was that you are in a state of a bit of a confusion, and more than how prepared you are or the market is to go out in the market and pitch, I think it's also to do with the sensitivity in the market on the audience perspective, right? How confident or how sensitive the audience is to being approached at that point of time. So more or less, I would say the impact was similar, and within a matter of, I would say, a few weeks, everybody was on lockdown, right? In Greenpeace, we did have our own escalation metrics to respond to COVID, which had different stages. And I would say by the end of March, all of the countries we are operating in were in stage 4, which meant that we did not have any offline activities happening. So for me, it's not a big difference of how the government has reacted in terms of the MCO or the lockdowns. Well, we have to understand that interest probably will not be created just by staying at home and seeing the ad for the first time that comes on TV, or seeing the ad the first time that comes on digital. So somewhere the interest was always there, right? What we are talking about in this situation is the opportunity to have that time and the mind space to have a look at it and spend more time discussing it, right? That's what has happened. And to answer your question, yes, definitely. We have actually seen Uh, the DRT response is going up in most of the markets where we have been doing DRT for quite a long time. And just so you know, it's not because we changed the creative. It's not that we started doing a COVID creative. It was the same creative, the same message, but the viewership and the response has gone up significantly across markets. And same has happened to most of our digital lead generations. So if you have to look at why this has happened, I wouldn't say this has happened just because they were at home. I would say this has happened because they now had the opportunity and time probably to look at those and think about them. And then when they get a call to explain about that, they are more interested to talk about it because they have that mind space to talk about it. And that probably is the reason of why this has significantly spiked up in terms of response. And it looks like it has suddenly been more successful than it was. The future is uncertain for sure. And even if you say tomorrow we have a vaccine, we go back to working and we have all the regular channels of fundraising operating, is that going to be the same? Maybe not. That's the question. So the way the entire industry is going to operate, the sector is going to operate, is going to change. The way people are going to engage is going to change. So for us, the key was how quickly do you reach out? And you don't necessarily need to say a lot of things in those messagings, but you need to be, the key is communicating and being constantly in touch with your supporter base, keeping them updated of your whereabouts and progress, and kind of reassuring them through those messaging. I think that goes a long way of staying connected with your donors and supporters, and the way they would react to you, as an NGO. And it's essentially a non-fundraising or non-ask kind of a communication, because generally the communications have one or the other kind of, ask from our donors to support, to engage. But this is more of reaching out to the donors because they are important to us and we want them to know that we care for them. And so I think that mindset really works, and we have seen that practically in the results of reaching out to our donors. Yes, definitely. There is a definite impact on messaging of environmental organizations, because we need to be relevant to what's happening outside, right? But if you ask me, has there been a direct impact of how you're using COVID or coronavirus as a source of putting your message across? I would say maybe that's not that simple. It's a little more complicated than that, because while we can talk about the results through this unwanted way of kind of reducing your pollution, or reducing the carbon footprint, or looking at outside and seeing the news of how our nature is flourishing, but I wouldn't say that's something any environmental NGO would like to use as part of we were saying the same, right? I think the messaging would, I think the impact on messaging would be more focused on the post-pandemic scenario and how relevant the work of each environmental NGO is to make sure that in future we have a greener and better planet, so to say. And obviously, like you asked, that has there been a difference because of the situation? Yes, because if you look at how the situation is evolving, there is a definite correlation to the air pollution levels, to the water pollution levels, and to the way the fossil fuel has been creating a climate change for us. So climate change definitely can be correlated, but I think at this point of time, we also need to see that our audience needs to have positive messaging. So as to say, post-COVID, how do we look at the world, and how do we say that, which direction we need to go? Should be our messaging on that. Is that a war cry, like what we're expecting to happen? Is there a political impact? There's going to be a big political impact. But how do you probably differentiate that kind of messaging where there is a more blaming, war, political impact going on globally, and make it more relevant and yet more positive in the way we want to move forward as a planet? I think that's what is going to be the change in messaging. And that's what everybody has been working on since the pandemic started. That's a good question. Actually, it's not easy. You might have funds available, and this might be the right way to start, but it's not going to be easy, and it's not like flipping a switch and changing things overnight. Even if you have the funds to transition from an offline mode, which is probably a more matured mode of fundraising, which is probably a higher volume that you expected, right? To a digital mode is not easy. It will take time, not just money, but it takes a lot of time to build that space. And like you said, that do you have enough available space? And that depends also on the market. It also depends on the kind of programs or campaigns that you're running on that market. And so I think there is a lot more complication there than very easily switching. Having said that, yes, this is the right thing to do, and so people have started doing that. But would that compensate for the loss for this year? No. Maybe that's a difficult thing to achieve. You cannot replace the scale that you are looking at. But yes, of course, this is how you have to start, and that's the starting point. And maybe then I think it's way of looking at as a course correction that you start somewhere, and there are different diversifications possible today, online and telefundraising. And globally, we have seen during this pandemic, while we have a halted growth in our offline modes, but globally, the telefundraising and your digital fundraising have really been doing strongly, even for that matter, DRTV. And that may be because of the kind of mind space that you got when everybody is at home, and more viewership, and more time to reach out to people and talk to them, and maybe people thinking more on environmental issues at this moment. So I would say there is a definite opportunity there, and people need to start working. But yeah, like you asked, is it that easy? It's not easy. It's not going to be overnight. Maybe it will take another year of working on this to make it really successful, and that needs a bit of organizational resilience and patience to achieve. Yes, like I said, that there is a different, a certain bit of emergency preparedness each NGO practices, right? But like I also said, that this has been a very different incident from that. So I would say that every NGO is in a different stage of evolution, if you look at it, right? And so if you had already been working on a strategy of diversification, and you are more prepared to switch channels, I think this impact was more operational, like I said, and not very strategic. So although there is still a certain amount of impact which we will face, everybody is going to face, but the recovery period is going to be much faster or better. But if you are in a stage where you have not really been thinking about diversification, and especially for NGOs who are heavily dependent on or heavily invested on offline modes of fundraising, I think this is a point of alarm where you start working out your strategy and reviewing that. And this is probably a good opportunity to see that how you can look at your strategy differently and diversify. So I would say there would be different NGOs in different phases of this evolution, and how they will react to the situation will depend on what the strategy was that they were following. So if I have to say the top three things that we are thinking right now of doing right after this, the first one would be, like I said, to test and introduce alternate sustainable modes of fundraising. I think that's going to be the key starting point. And if you're already doing it, you want to do it more right now in this situation. The second point would be strengthen your content and engagement. Like I said, it's not going to be the same. So you need to be relevant while speaking to people, while reaching out to your audience, especially after this situation. So that relevance, that research, that understanding of your audience and connecting that relevance to your cause is extremely important. So I think there's a great deal of work that we are going to do in terms of how we engage with people and in terms of how we fundraise and our content to fundraising. And the third thing would be definitely review your expenses, prioritize, I would say, your expenses, right? And reinvest or redirect most of your investment to high productive channels and more priority channels, and probably reduce what you're spending on, not so priority channels at this moment. So we look at the entire pit. So to make it more streamlined, more effective, because all NGOs are going to get a certain amount of cash flow impact after this. So it's very important that if you want to stay afloat, if you want to stay strong in the areas that you really want to work in, it will take a significant planning of how you redirect your investments to those areas, right? So I think these are the top 3 things that I think we are going to do going forward. Hope that works.